Comical Heathen podcast, one man's weird odyssey into the world of religious satire. Welcome. This is your host, Dr. Jerry Jaffe, the world's most highly educated stand-up comedian. Welcome to this episode of the Comical Heathen podcast. Today's episode features my interview with Peter Hinchliffe and Michael Nugent of Atheist Ireland. Helping me discuss and prepare for that interview is going to be my good friend, guest co-host, Sean Lynch. I'll have more about the interview coming up shortly. Let me welcome you to today's episode. In particular, today's a special episode for me. Today's episode is the launch of what we at the Comical Heathen are calling Season 2. So welcome to Season 2, Episode 1. The premise of the podcast remains the same. I am writing a book about religious satire, slowly but surely writing this hypothetical book. And I started this podcast as a way to share interviews that I was doing for that book on religion, on satire, on comedy. And if you go back through Season 1, you'll see all kinds of interviews. A lot of comedians, some writers, some other interesting people. Be sure to check that out. We wanted to start a Season 2 just to indicate evolution in the podcast and what we're trying to accomplish. So I've spent about the past 5, maybe 6 years now researching, writing. There's a publisher I'm working with, but I don't want to say anything until, things are more official in the regards to publishing this hypothetical book of mine. But I'm just saying I've been thinking about satire more than the average bear for the past 5+ years. And one of the things that often comes up is something to the effect of, is satire, is religious satire, is political satire, so-called preaching to the choir. This came up sometimes in earlier episodes. It's a theme, people bring it up, critics bring it up, people wonder, is there really any point to it, any deeper point? Maybe it's a good laugh, maybe it's a good time. Is it really affecting things? And that kind of question became to the forefront of my mind when I saw this headline early in 2021. It was a headline in the Irish Times, and the RTE, that's like the Irish BBC, they had a New Year's Eve countdown show, and it included various skits and sketches. And the first headline that I saw, because this became an ongoing story with several headlines, but the first headline that I saw was RTE apologizes for blasphemous sketch after 1,100 complaints. There is a parody news site in Ireland called the Waterford Whispers, and they're not, if you've never heard of them, they're not necessarily well known outside of Ireland. Waterford Whispers News, that's the proper name of the satirical group. And they provided some programming for the show, or some sketches. And they ran a sketch in which God was arrested. I actually did email Waterford Whispers and to see if they wanted to talk about this. And no one got back to me, which is fine. Maybe that's a conversation for another day, but I still wanted to cover this. Let me describe this sketch to you. You can find it online, but just out of respect for the Waterford Whispers, if I didn't want to replay it without their express permission. So I am going to just describe this sketch to you. It starts with a news anchor, and the news anchor was Mr. Mac Griana. He's an actual former RTE newsreader. So it was very sort of meta Orson Welles, we're not sure if it's a parody or not moment, I'm sure. But in this short sketch, the Irish Times described it as being 23 seconds long. Mr. Griana reads a mocked-up news story, which God has been arrested, and this is what the supposed news copy said. I'm reading this from the newspaper right now. The 5-billion-year-old stood accused of forcing himself on a young Middle Eastern migrant and allegedly impregnating her against her will, before being sentenced to 2 years in prison, with the last 24 months suspended. And then they had a clip of a man dressed as God being led away by, guards. The God character is heard shouting over his shoulder at the cameras, "It was over 2,000 years ago." So that was the sketch. Amusing, not amusing, cute, whatever. There's a context to this joke, which is that Irish courts have had trouble trying people for these sorts of, things they've been accused of. Courts are very lenient and unresponsive. And in this era of hashtag #MeToo, some people want to see the Irish courts take a more modern view of these very serious types of accusations. And of course, Ireland has its history as a Catholic country with some religious parody, religious satire. Fine. 23-second joke got over 1,100 complaints and resulted in the RTE removing the sketch completely from the online version of that New Year's Eve show. A leader of these complainers was one Archbishop Eamon Martin, who tweeted about it. Let me read his tweet. Irish Times, January 1st, 2021. Archbishop denounces RTE New Year's Eve shows satirical report accusing God of rape. Archbishop Eamon Martin called for its removal, calling it an outrageous clip. This outrageous clip should be removed immediately. Announced by all people of goodwill. And he's shocked that the producer, editor of the program didn't realize how deeply offensive it was. First of all, Monty Python is from 50 years ago, and they had many parodies of letters of people complaining about how deeply shocked they were. I don't know how anyone writes a letter of complaint in the world after Monty Python. I would have thought Monty Python had put the nail into the coffin of letters of complaint of people expressing shock and outrage. To broadcast such a deeply offensive and blasphemous clip about God or our Blessed Mother Mary during the Christmas season, on the eve of the solemn feast of Mary, Mother of God, is insulting to all Catholics and Christians. Another part of the context of this little puzzle is that during the aughts, for about a decade, Ireland had on its book Blasphemy Laws. This is partially where the organization Atheist Ireland enters into my story, because I reached out to them to get more information about this situation. They also posted on their blogs and were also approached for some interviews from different media outlets. So the organization Atheist Ireland became part of the story. In the interview that comes in later on in this episode, one of the things we're going to talk about is the blasphemy laws, how they came to be. They were actually overturned in early 2020. So part of this sketch, even existing, is that it was one of the first efforts by the RTE to do something even a little bit edgy post-blasphemy laws. So even that shows the chilling effect. Blasphemy laws are free speech issues and freedom of religion issues. They're a human rights issue. I'll remind you that in Egypt, Bassem Youssef was arrested. I'll remind you that in Russia, Pussy Riot was arrested. In Russia, they passed new laws making statements offensive to people's religion illegal because of Pussy Riot. Blasphemy laws are freedom of speech issues, are freedom of worship issues, and are human rights issues. And it is really weird to me. It is really weird. Why is any religious leader weighing in on a joke? It's a joke. It's just like Facebook, man. If you don't like my comment, just keep scrolling. You don't have to register complaint every time your friend or someone on your Facebook friend makes some comment you disagree with. Notice on Facebook, when there's like political or social comments, you get a lot of your friends like it, but the people who are pissed want to comment. I can leave a comment. I'm not losing any sleep over your Facebook comments, but it's always the people going, why? I don't go into your church and tell you how to collect money or what kind of silly hats to wear. You be you. Leave the jokes to the comedians. It comes up in the interview, but I'm going to just say this now. Do you think some doofus in Ohio with his little podcast in his basement is going to be talking about Waterford Whispers and some 23-second sketch if the Archbishop Eamon Martin had not complained about it in the first place? Think of how interesting and ignored it would have been if he had just scrolled on by. But no, he had to make an issue out of it. And I'm not here to talk about the spotty history of the Catholic Church, as in, where do they get off on their high hats telling us how to comedify? They don't have a great record. It was Catholic priests, not in Ireland, but in Poland last year, 2019, who had a book burning of Harry Potter books. I don't want to hear complaints about my stupid joke from an organization that is burning Harry Potter books because there's something in Deuteronomy about stoning witches. All the best stonings are in Deuteronomy. Let's face it, right? In fact, Deuteronomy would be a great name for a head shop. Hey, man, come on down to Deuteronomy, man, and get stoned. And really stoned, man. And, that book burning was in Poland, not in Ireland, but it was Catholic Church, Catholic priests. I can't take anyone seriously who, when they're doing their job, look like a cosplay that's gone wrong. Now, I've performed at a lot of anime conventions, and at anime convention, there are no cosplays that go wrong. Every single one of them is a work of art and a work of beauty, and I love you all. When I go into a church and see a guy in a big hat and purple robes swinging incense around, I think, this is somebody who wants to cosplay, but they just don't quite know which anime they belong in. Poland also has the world's largest statue of Jesus. Which, fine, have any statue you want, but I'm sure somewhere in the Bible is something about idolatry. I'm not a Catholic. Call Archbishop Martin and have him explain to you how you have the world's tallest statue of Jesus when the Bible specifically says no idolatry. Plus, what do you think? Like a medium-sized statue isn't good enough? You think God is up there in heaven with binoculars going, I can't see how much they love me. Oh, look over there. There's a statue. Finally, someone made a statue of me big enough. Those are the ones who are getting into heaven. A rich man has as much chance of getting into heaven as a giant statue of Jesus has of getting through the eye of a needle. You know, why do you need such a large Jesus? You don't lose him. He's not your car keys. You don't misplace Jesus. If you believe in Jesus, he's everywhere. You don't wake up in the morning running around like a chicken with your head cut off going, honey, have you seen my Savior? I'm late for work. You know, he's not your car keys. What kind of Savior is this? You know, get your gods sorted out. This is weird. It is weird when religious people weigh in on jokes. My favorite word for priest is cleric. All these clerics, these learned men. I love the word cleric because it's also what you call battle priests in Dungeons and Dragons. And it just reminds me that organized religion is just a role-playing game that's gone very, very wrong. Well, that was my rundown on the Waterford Whispers situation. I thought it was pretty outrageous, and to help me discuss it, I'm now going to bring in my co-host, very good friend, touring headliner, formerly one of the co-creators of Celebrity Deathmatch and other writer for other television projects. Please welcome to the show, Sean Lynch.
What's
Sean,
happening, Jerry?
How you doing, buddy? Hey, thanks for doing this with us.
Always
How
a
you doing today?
I'm hanging in there, man. No better way to spend a Sunday than chatting with a pal about silly stuff.
Is this a crazy world we live in? Yesterday you were attending a Zoom wedding. Now you're attending a Zoom satire podcast.
Yes, there wasn't a dry lens in the joint.
So, Sean, I'm going to turn this over to that interview, and you and I will come out the other side and have a few more minutes. You let me know what you think.
All right, looking forward to it.
Well, this is your host, Dr. Jerry Jaffe, the world's most highly educated stand-up comedian. And I was so excited to be able to contact, through the Atheist Ireland website, a couple of gentlemen from that organization who are going to tell us more about what was going on with the Waterford Whispers and the RTE and what it was like at the epicenter of this controversy, so to speak. Let me welcome my guests. I have two gentlemen with me. One is Michael Nugent, a chairperson from the Atheist Ireland.
Yeah, that's right, chairperson. Okay. Chairperson of Atheist Ireland. Okay. We're a voluntary advocacy group that campaigns both to promote atheism as a more reliable worldview than faith or religion, but we also promote secularism in terms of separation of church and state. And when we're doing that, we're willing to work alongside religious groups who also promote separation of church and state.
Excellent. Thank you, Michael. Welcome. I want to get into almost every word that you just said while I have you with me. But let's welcome our other guest. This is Peter Hinchliffe, the leader of the Kerry group of the Atheist Ireland. Welcome, Peter.
Oh, thank you very much. It's only a word. Less a leader, more just a representative, really. There's a few of us down here compared
to... You were described online as runs the Atheist Kerry group. So
that's probably true, but the other three people do stuff now and again.
Small but passionate foursome.
Sorry, Jerry, it's actually quite relevant as a distinction in that the things that we do combine both, political lobbying at a national and an international level against blasphemy laws, but also, and what Peter is better able to articulate, is the impact, in Peter's case, in small rural community, and in other cases in cities around the country, where the impact on the ground can be much more deleterious because they're the areas sometimes where the Catholic Church still has residues of its influence that it doesn't have in the main cities anymore.
Yeah, we pick up the local politics, local radio, local papers. It gets quite passionate sometimes. If you didn't have these smaller groups around the country, you could miss out on quite an important part of the discussion. So we play our part.
Well, talking about the hard work you do on the local level, sort of brings us to how I came across your name. Because you apparently were involved in a local newspaper exchange about the Waterford Whispers comedy sketch.
Yeah, I was contacted by a local paper, the Kerry Man, who sent a list of questions to me and a list of mirror questions to Father McManara, who's a local priest. Actually, a very nice guy. They sent us this list of questions, and we both responded. He responded on the phone verbally, so he didn't have a copy.
Okay.
I responded. I sent the copy back in response to all the questions. And what I found was they told us they were going to put them side by side, so our opinions would be there in the whole.
Right.
What actually happened was they converted it into a sort of conversation piece. They just picked out certain lines. Didn't represent what I'd said very well. Left out all the little blasphemous landmines I'd left in it just to make it more interesting for people. Right. And because that was on topic, and I wanted to see how far they would go. They were discussing blasphemy. Would they be willing to actually put some of these comments in when they were contextual? And it was a bit of a hack. So I rang Foreign McMahon and we got together and said we'd like to do it again. So we put it through our own internal magazine, which is the Secular Sunday magazine from Atheist Ireland, which shows what sort of guy he is, because he was willing to send his stuff into an audience that wouldn't be on his part at all.
I'll put a link to the whole article as I found it in a description of this podcast so people can see it for themselves. You said you put in a lot of blasphemous landmines. It's sort of interesting when I read it myself initially. It was hard for me to know what those would be necessarily. You know what I mean? Because I would be, very like-minded.
It can be, of course, it's in the eye of the beholder. The whole point of the article, really, what I wrote was that blasphemy is in the eye of the beholder. This is the old line. I can't be in charge of your level of offence. If you're offended by what I say. But so simply saying there was no God, I'd look forward to a skit about Muhammad being arrested for rape of his 6-year-old child bride.
Michael and Peter, just this simple question. When the Waterford Whispers piece came out, a part of a New Year's Eve sketch that they did you see it? When did you first hear about it?
Yeah, no, we only really found out about it when the Catholic bishops started complaining about it.
I was going to say RT is the main channel in context. It's sort of Ireland's BBC you might know more of. It's the one people pay their licence fee for. People have a sense of ownership over it, and they feel it has a sense of responsibility back towards them. But anyway, sorry, carry on, Michael.
Yeah, no, what was interesting about it was that it was the first attempt by the Catholic Church to really try and block things after the law against blasphemy was removed. The history of it is quite interesting of blasphemy laws in Ireland, because when the Irish Constitution was put in place in 1937, it included a clause saying that blasphemy is an offence which is punishable in accordance with law. But there wasn't any attempts to put it into law until the 1960s. And then it was put into law, and there was a great exchange where the then Justice Minister was defending his blasphemy law, but it didn't include any definition of what blasphemy was. And he was asked, legally, what does it consist of? What does the offence consist of? And he said, blasphemy is what everybody knows it to be. which is a very Irish way of approaching, passing laws that are going to potentially fine people or whatever. So then the only time that it was tested was in about 1999, I think. It was after the divorce referendum. There was a cartoon in one of the papers, and there was a blasphemy case taken against the cartoonist. The courts found that the law was unenforceable for the very reason that I've outlined, because it didn't define what the offence consisted of. So that left us in a kind of limbo for a while, where the law was on the books, but it couldn't in practice be enforced. And then, for some reason, the government decided 10 years ago or so when they were overhauling the entire Defamation Act within which the blasphemy law resided. It was called blasphemous defamation. We expected at that stage they would take that opportunity to just delete it. But instead, they took the opportunity to put in a definition to make it enforceable, which was absolutely bizarre. And the definition was terrible. I mean, the first test of the definition was that it had to cause outrage, and which was, bear in mind, 10 years ago, we were at the height of Islamic cartoon controversies and things like that. So I mean, the last thing you want to do is create incentives in the law for people to demonstrate outrage. It's just completely counterproductive. Yes. But what we did in response, Atheist Ireland, is we did a couple of things. One is on the day that it came into force, we published on our website a number of blasphemous statements just to test the government's willingness to enforce it or not. And then the other thing, because as well as being a dangerous law, it's obviously a silly law. So we founded a church to worship the Justice Minister, and the Justice Minister was Dermot Ahern. So we formed the Church of Dermatology, and our role was to protect him from being blasphemed against. And our beliefs included that Dermot Ahern created the universe out of nothing, and that ice cream wafers were literally the body of Dermot Ahern. And so we had all of these things that were obviously aimed at highlighting the silliness of the law, but we combined it with serious lobbying, because one of the first things that happened when the law was passed in Ireland is that the Islamic states at the United Nations started citing wording from the Irish law as what they wanted implemented internationally. And they were, I mean, the reason they were doing that is they like pointing to Western states who have blasphemy laws and saying, well, look, you've got blasphemy laws, why can't we have laws against what they call defamation of Islam? And so they were using it to justify persecuting not only atheists, but minority faith members in their countries. So it's a very strange campaign in that it's a combination of something that's very silly and also very dangerous.
Yes. And highlighting the Islamic states at the UN was a major part of my approach anyway, to when we were having the referendum, when I was approaching people on the street or whatever else online. I mean, that really took people back. They didn't realise the effect it was having internationally, so that was useful in context. I was just wondering, Michael, if you remembered the Stephen Fry incident, which I think highlighted it.
That was another time, and that was Stephen Fry is a kind of comedian and actor, like very well respected English comedian actor. He appeared on a program on RTE called The Meaning of Life, and the presenter, who again was a kind of a very well respected, long respected Irish presenter called Gay Byrne, and he asked Stephen Fry, what he would say if he was confronted by God after he died. And Stephen Fry's answer was, how he said he would ask him, how dare you create a world in which there's such misery, that's utterly evil. Why should I respect such a capricious, mean-minded, stupid God who creates a world so full of injustice and pain? And there were complaints then made about that, and the police investigated it. Right. And they didn't take any action against him, but the reason that they didn't take any action was another dangerous reason. Is they found that because the law said it has to cause outrage, and they said they didn't find that there was sufficient outrage, demonstrated by the public to meet that test. And again, that's so dangerous. That's almost even more dangerous than if they had taken the case, because that again would mean that if somebody had gone to the police after that and said, say if there was another Islamic cartoon issue, and a group of Muslims went, we want a blasphemy case taken against that, all the guards could say is well, I'm sorry, you'll have to go away and demonstrate some outrage.
Break a few windows.
Well, we had outrageous politics demonstrated in the United States on January 6th. So this is what happens when your leaders encourage the outrage rather than... civil debate of some kind.
And that's the core of opposition to blasphemy laws, is that whatever you think about things, you should be able to discuss them civilly. You should be able to you should respect people's right to hold their beliefs. Right. But that doesn't mean that you have to respect the content of the beliefs. The content of the beliefs has to be open to challenge. And indeed, under human rights law, that's pretty much accepted, that not only is it valid to challenge, religious beliefs, it's valid to do so even if it causes offence, and even if the criticism is unreasonable, or even indeed if it involves ridicule. These are settled things in human rights law. Apart from in Islamic countries, we do a lot of our campaigning at the United Nations. And at the OSCE, which is the Organisation for Security and Cooperation in Europe. The United States delegations have always been very strongly supportive of freedom of expression. They're one of the delegations that we feel comfortable, knowing that they're on the side on this issue.
Now, Michael, wasn't I've read online that the Irish blasphemy laws of the past decade that you describe were overturned in 2020?
Yeah, we had a lengthy campaign to have because it was in the Constitution, it required a referendum to change the Constitution to allow the government to then repeal the law against blasphemy. So we had a lengthy campaign just to get that referendum. And it kind of started with when the new blasphemy law was put in place 10 years ago, and it took us about a decade to get the referendum. Now, it's part of a wider series of things. Like the people of Ireland have moved on from the Catholic Church. There were two other referendums during that time, one to legalise marriage equality for gay people and one to legalise abortion. And so this was part of that. And there's now a fairly solid, on those three referendums, a fairly solid 2-1 majority in favour of liberal positions on those issues. That referendum took place a couple of years ago, and we won it probably more comfortably than we thought, because there was still, there's still a large minority that feel they still run the country through Catholic views, and there's still a tendency for politicians to pander to them, because there's a feeling that older people and more conservative people are more likely to vote than are, younger and more liberal people. So we were quite pleased now to get that through, and it's probably the most significant change that Atheist Ireland has managed to bring about, is removing the law against blasphemy. We still have a few other things like that. We still have to challenge or are continuing to challenge the control that the Catholic Church still has over our education system. Sure. So there's still a lot of things to do, but the distinction I would make is that whereas Ireland used to be a Catholic country, right, it's now a pluralist country with Catholic laws that we're gradually dismantling.
In that decade that there was this active blasphemy law, and you mentioned the Stephen Fry case, that video of him answering that question, it went somewhat viral, actually. I've certainly seen it myself. Were there many other instances of investigations or indeed prosecutions?
Well, no, one of the difficulties is that because most media outlets are set up to run a business and make money by producing programs or newspapers, they're not going to risk doing anything that is going to get them into a legal case. So there's a self-censorship involved, where the media outlets will just not publish anything that could get them into trouble. I know, like I was told before various live interviews, including on RTE, which is the national radio station here, I've been told to, make sure you don't say anything blasphemous. So what happens is that there's this kind of soft effect of the media just silencing itself, so the government doesn't have to take cases.
We had a member on the radio, was it John, who was told he couldn't make a comment during
John
the
Hamill, well, yeah,
because I tried to repeat it locally on the radio. I was hoping they'd stop me, but they didn't. They let me go ahead. So I did repeat it.
Well, one of the things I noticed in the, the coverage of the Waterford Whispers sketch, I mean, first of all, there were complaints, and then Archbishop Eamon Martin, sort of represented the complainers in the press. And then also in your piece, Peter, the Friar McNamara, who you did the mirror questions with. Father, sorry. Both, seem to speak about the need for blasphemy laws.
Yeah, but once it brought back, entirely religious man, this is sacred ground. And from the brief conversations I've had, obviously outside of the piece with him on this, because I know him, but not that well. He considers the sacred to be sacred, and it goes further than just religious offence. Well, there's all sorts of offences.
After their deluge of complaints, or I don't know, they claim to have gotten 1,000+ complaints. I don't.
Yeah, the same people over and over again.
There's a large number of complaints for the RTE, but they did remove that sketch from the stream that people can watch if they want to go back and watch the show.
Yeah.
In America, famously, we had in the early 20th century prohibition, and then that was repealed. And there was a short period of a couple of months where it's kind of reported, I wasn't there, that people partied a lot, liquor was freely, legally available, and people, had celebratory parties. I don't know if you believe the caricature, there was a drunken 6 months in American history.
It wasn't my experience that we became any more blasphemous.
Well, that's what I was wondering, if there was any kind of celebratory free speech.
I don't think people felt the weight of the restriction on themselves personally. It was, as Michael was saying, it was in what you didn't see. You didn't see the articles that weren't printed in the papers.
Sure.
So you wouldn't have seen the sketch that wasn't shown before,
right,
or what the writer didn't bother to write.
Yeah, and this is the first test, really, since the Blasphemy Law of RTE being prepared to... RTE wouldn't have published that sketch before the Blasphemy Law was removed. Now, they did publish it, and I thought it was quite a tame sketch. And it was... So there were complaints against it, and initially, it's quite interesting. Initially, RTE didn't remove it. Initially, they apologised if they offended people, but they said they were keeping it on the playback player. And then they had an internal meeting, and they decided themselves that to remove it. They decided themselves that they'd broken the law, even though there's a test available, which is complaints as well as to RTE can be made to the Broadcasting Authority, who would judge whether or not it breaks the law. And so what RTE did was that they decided to report themselves to the Broadcasting Authority. And so what we've done now, which has never been done before, in fact, the Broadcasting Commission have told us that this hasn't been done before, so I'm not sure how it's going to play out. But we contacted the Broadcasting Authority and said, given that RTE has reported itself to you over this, that means that there's not going to be anybody defending the case. So here are some defences of this case based on arguments that that RTE itself has made before, and that you yourself have stood up before in terms of the legitimacy of offending people. And they've said, well, there's nothing in the law that enables us to take into account third-party, assessments, but we will pass it on to the members of the Commission for their information. So it'll be interesting to see if that has any effect, because we've relied on their own rulings in the past on offence and things like that. It's just a very silly thing for RTE to be doing. I mean, it's that there's obviously within RTE, given that they did broadcast it in the first place, and given that they did initially apologise for offending, but said that they were going to keep it up on their website, that there's obviously a division within RTE between people who want to be more liberal and people who want to maintain the old regime.
As a comedian and satirist, I just wonder this chilling effect and self-censorship, clearly must affect, comedy as well as the arts in general.
We're hearing more and more about this. I am, and Michael could obviously better answer this, but I just say I'm hearing comedians who are refusing to go to college campuses, who are refusing to do certain gigs because they just know they can't do their good material. Or they're not free to do the material they want to do. That concerns me. It's still blasphemy in a sense. People are still saying, you can't say that because I hold this sacred and I'm offended. That concerns me.
There are secular groups who have their own version of religious faith and dogma, and their own blasphemies and their own shamings. And their own desire to control what people can and can't say. And one of the big dangers that we think is happening at the moment is that the move towards having laws against what they call hate speech, which is a very ambiguous, ill-defined term, that laws against hate speech could end up being blasphemy laws by another name. Another thing, by the way, and there's an irony in it as well, which is like, let's say, you're in Ohio, is it? Yes. If it wasn't for this, there's no way that you would be even aware of Waterford Whispers news. Indeed, there's an advantage. There's an advantage to the people who are being. Let's qualify in democracies where you're just not, where the worst that'll happen is you get fined. Right. There's an advantage in highlighting your work. Now, it's different, obviously, if your version of blasphemy is going to involve having to worry about somebody coming and cutting your head off. I'm thinking of the Waterford Whispers as our example on the table. In addition to me being in Ohio and being able to hear about it, I was able to hear about it thanks to the internet. So the Waterford Whispers has a potentially international reach. So the internet must have an effect on blasphemy laws when you're in a local situation. Yeah, you can appeal to and offend people worldwide. If you traditionally might be living in a country that's more fundamentalist, if you like, theologically. Now, with obviously the government restrictions in place, but now can see this material from all over the world, and it's got to be changing things. Right. It's got to be for good. I thought the internet, when it came out, was going to be this fantastic project. It was going to support critical thinking, and we'd all be logical, reasonable, rational people by this point. That hasn't worked. It's obviously gone in the other direction completely for many people. I gather that studies show that both have happened. The internet has had a kind of positive impact on critical thinking skills and even knowledge of history, but it has become a platform for disinformation and radicalization. So both things are true somehow, sort of. But one of the positive things is that, say, if you move beyond just pure blasphemy into just promoting the ideas of reason and applying reason to evidence as being a more reliable worldview than religion. Right. One of my favourite things that's happened is that Richard Dawkins has had The God Delusion and other books published, translated into Arabic and other languages, and allowing people to download them free on the internet. So there's a whole load of information that is now available to people in countries where the regimes have in the past been able to more repressively prevent people from even seeing things. So they, even if they can't freely express the ideas, they have access to getting the ideas.
But yeah, the downside to the rise in offence taking is that Richard Dawkins was recently deplatformed from Dublin. He was coming to Dublin this week and was deplatformed. So we have the other side of it, you know, in a country where I've been to see Richard Dawkins speak twice in Ireland already.
And those deplatformings, by the way, are typically now by secular groups. You know, they're by, you know, students' unions and things like that. Right. It's not the Catholic Church. It's young people who are who you would expect to be more liberal, saying, you know, our primary responsibility in a debating society is to create a safe space for our members. The distinction that we try to make, if you wanted to encapsulate our position on these ideas in one sentence, is Please. You have rights, your beliefs do not.
Yes.
And that's the distinction that we try to make with people.
Okay.
We completely respect you as a person. We respect your right as a person under freedom of thought, conscience, religion and belief to believe what you want to believe, as long as you're not, and we respect your right to manifest that belief as long as you're not interfering in the rights of others. But the content of your beliefs don't have any right. The contents of your beliefs are open to challenge, debate, ridicule, you know, whatever people want to say about the content of your beliefs, they're entitled to do.
Does comedy writing, Michael, you've written several books and your musical, which have a comedic flavor to them. Does comedy or satire have a role to play in these debates? Or what role does satire have to play in these debates?
It has a large, I mean, it's a perfectly... it has been for centuries. It's a perfectly valid way to highlight silly ideas is through satire. Now, the one qualification that I would put on it is I don't think satire is an acceptable, and also the law doesn't think that satire is an acceptable cloak for defamation. So if you want to satirize ideas, or if you want to satirize organizations to some extent, but if you're using satire to suggest that individual people are, you know, guilty of criminal activity, for example, you know, that's the line that I don't think that is acceptable to cross.
Well,
I think you have to be able to see...
go ahead, Peter. You go first.
I think you have to be able to see the funny side of an outraged bishop or an outraged mob of very religious people when there's so much bad out there that they could be outraged about. But they choose this topic, this subject to come down and crash down on, and this is the hill they're going to stand on. There's a huge history of abuse in Ireland. This natural outrage. If we'd seen that natural outrage pour out, we could have been convinced that they cared. But in those cases, it had to almost. I'm not talking about a specific bishop here. I don't know his history in it. But it had to be pulled from them. It was like pulling teeth to get them to be upset and angry. So there's huge satire, I think, in watching these people develop an argument and stand up and say how offended they are and how hurt they personally are.
Well, I may be paraphrasing slightly, but John Cleese once said something to the effect of, "Some people need to be offended."
Absolutely.
Yeah, there's a lot of variation of that. I mean, there's another comedian whose name I can't remember at the moment, but I saw doing a routine. I think he's from Australia. And this was about 10 years ago, and he was saying, you know, somebody says, after one of my shows, you know, I'm offended. I'll go, yeah, right, okay, you're offended. But then nothing happens. You know, you're offended, right? Fair enough. Yes. It's not as if I went to this show and I heard a comedian say something and I was offended, and then a bolt of lightning came down. You know, it's just get over it. It's you're perfectly entitled to be offended. I'm offended by lots of things. I'm offended by lots of things in the Bible and the Quran, but I'm not trying to ban them.
And Michael, I do know from researching your biography that you're the author of several books. Since that's not what I contact you to interview about, but I'd love to hear, like in for a while, one moment, tell me about your writing. What What would you like people to know about your writing, or what should I look
Well,
for?
a lot of it is a while ago now, because for the last decade or so, I've been concentrating mostly on political advocacy with Atheist Ireland. But I've done a few comedy books. Some of them were books of kind of prank letters to famous people and their real life replies. One of them was a more serious one. Was a book about the internet. In the mid-1990s, I wrote a book called Ireland on the Internet, and it was just when the web aspect of the internet was just kicking in. I was just trying to bring people up to date on what this might entail for the future. And then I've written various contributions to more serious books on the likes of secular education and political issues that would be related to Atheist Ireland. So it's a kind of a mixed bag. I kind of go through phases of being serious and phases of being silly, and I think probably either of them is a good retreat from the other when I need to.
What's the first book of Michael Nugent I should try to read if I want to?
My favourite is, in fact, my first book, which is called Dear John, the John McKay Letters, which was a series of send-up letters to famous people and organisations and real-life replies from them. Now, that was written a few decades ago, and it's under the pseudonym John McKay. So it's the Dear John Letters by John McKay. But if you want to get a flavour of what I write about at the moment, which is more serious stuff a lot of the time with some comedy, my website, michaelnugent.com, has a lot of stuff there that you might be interested in.
Well, that link will definitely be included in this description of this podcast for people to look up and wander into the writings of Michael Nugent. What advice would you give a young writer if a young writer wanted to write about satire or politics, and you read a draft or you were speaking to them? What's your advice?
First thing is, don't worry at all about the quality of your first draft. Most of my first drafts are terrible. But you just get it done. You get all the points done, and then the writing starts. Writing is rewriting. Would be my main thought on it. that all you're doing in your first draft is you're putting down the raw materials that you're going to use to do the writing, and then you start writing, and just keep at it and write stuff that you enjoy writing. I don't necessarily agree with this thing, write what you know, but I would say write what you enjoy writing about. Don't force yourself into writing something that's a strain for you, because you'll just get bored with it and you won't do it. And then just keep writing. Like, you'll get if you do it in that way, you'll get a first draft done fairly quickly, and then you can just leave it for a while. In fact, I would advise people to leave your first draft for a while, so that when you're looking at it again, you're looking at it with fresh eyes, and you realise, oh, that bit that I thought was brilliant at 4 o'clock in the morning that night is actually terrible. But this little bit here, which I just threw off as a almost like an afterthought, I can work that into a really good section, and also, of course, do it every day. Don't just leave yourself 3 weeks without writing anything.
For the Waterford Whispers, let's say minor controversy that it ultimately, probably is and turns out to be. Did you have any final thoughts or lessons learned about that whole situation? Peter, you can go first.
My thought on that is, of course, we did lose, but it was taken down. And that worries me, because once again, we won't see the effect of that, because it won't be shown if in the future they decide not to do sketches and whatever else. What we do about that, I'm not sure. I don't want to go out and just be as outrageous as we possibly can all the time, but I think we have to keep pushing the limit. But, keeping that bar high, don't let them lower it any further. And that goes again, I know I've beaten this already, it goes for those secular dogmatic groups out there who also want to lessen free speech. And of course, without us trying to sound patronising, it's not just the speech that offends us, but groups we can agree with who are doing this, who are oppressing others and keeping free speech down. We need to hold that line, hold that bar as high as we can, and fight for that principle. And hopefully more and more people are going to, keep doing that. I won't say start doing it, keep doing it. Thank
you, Peter. Michael, any final thoughts or lessons learned?
Well, I've been involved in a lot of political campaigns in Ireland and internationally. The two biggest have been campaigning against IRA and loyalist terrorism in Northern Ireland for, democratic settlements in Northern Ireland, and then on secularism and separation of church and state generally, both in Ireland and internationally. And I think what's common to both of those that I've learned over the years is that social change, particularly in these days, and political change, it may seem as if you're getting nowhere and you're just chipping away and nothing's really happening. But if you look at things from the fall of the Berlin Wall to the end of apartheid in South Africa, to even the changes in Ireland with regard to the end of the Northern Ireland terrorism and a lot of the moves in terms of abortion and marriage equality and blasphemy going, what tends to happen is that something happens. Now, it's not something that the campaigners do or plan. Something happens that just changes the mood in society. And then the whole thing becomes unsustainable and it crashes down very quickly. So I think that's what's going to happen to the remnants of Catholic influence on Irish society. I don't know what will cause it.
Right.
I don't know when it will happen. But when it does happen, I'm optimistic that it will happen quickly. And then all of the work that we've been doing will be retrospectively useful in providing a roadmap to where you go next.
All right, gentlemen, thank you so much for taking the time to talk to me about this. The sketch itself might turn out to be a fairly minor blip in the history of satire, but it does sort of capture a lot of themes in one location that we can talk about. So
it's all part of a process.
A never-ending process as well, so you can't really stop at one point, look back and say, right, that's done. It just keeps going. But very enjoyable. Thank you very much.
Thanks for contacting us.
Hey, Sean, I wanted to ask you something that they brought up that you might have experienced as a comedian or a television writer, which is they were talking about how once the blasphemy laws are in the air, let alone they're on the books, there's a kind of chilling effect, like writers and producers self-censor because they know the trouble that it might cause them.
Well, I'd say 4 out of 5 do, and then there's always that one guy who gets real inspired by it. The one guy gets
that guy lasts more than one season is the question.
Oh yeah, but it's true. I mean, there's some.
So that was just a teaser of the conversation Sean Lynch and I had after playing the Atheist Ireland interview with Peter and Michael. By the way, how great were Peter and Michael? I really appreciate them and can't thank them and the organization enough for taking the time out to talk with me. But what's going on right now? What's going on right now is I invited Sean to come and debrief with me. And he and I are such good friends, and we're both, what is the Japanese word I'm looking for? Oshabedi, which my wife will tell you means won't shut up. I don't know if that's an exact translation, but that's pretty much what she says to me when she says I'm being Oshabedi. The long and the short of it is, what actually happened was Sean and I wound up like rapping and riffing for about 90 minutes. And there is, even with editing and trimming for good taste and good humor, there was no way I was going to cram like another 30 to 60 minutes of me and Sean into the same episode as that wonderful interview. On the one hand, it deserves its own space to breathe, and on the other hand, me and Sean had stuff to say, and I don't want to have an overstuffed 2-hour-long, podcast episode. So I'm making the prudent decision to divide this into a part 1 and a part 2. So, of course, if you were on board listening to this episode, and thank you for doing so, to eavesdrop on that conversation that Peter and Michael and I had, I thank you. If you're interested to see what Sean and I had to say about the conversation, I will say from Sean's perspective, he's written for television, including MTV's Celebrity Deathmatch. He has done shows for Amazon Prime, and he had some experiences and insights into what you might call corporate censorship and self-censorship, as well as just discussing the role of satire in comedy and entertainment in society. And then on my side, it's how does this fit into my book project? Like, what did I learn? What can I apply? What can I take forward? What stood out to me? We did have a pretty interesting conversation, but I'm going to release it as a part 2. So if you're just finishing this episode, just scroll down and or up, depending on how your podcast service lists new episodes, and it'll say Season 2, Episode 1, Part 2 with Sean Lynch. And that's going to be me and Sean riffing on these themes. And we do talk about the interview and some of the things that came up in it. But he's such a goofball, and we both won't shut up. Other things come up, too. We spend some time talking about humorous Christian album covers. We spend some time talking about Jewish space lasers and other social or silly topics. So if you're so inclined, look for part 2, and I hope you enjoy it. Oh, and while I was talking to Sean, my friend Ian Harris from LA called me, and I invited him to call into the show if he had anything he wanted to sort of get off his chest. He had a little mini rant about arguing with people about raising the minimum wage. So that's going to be snuck into part 2 as well. So come and listen to Sean and me and a little bit of Ian Harris. Thank you so much. So let me just wrap up this part 1 of season 2, episode 1, with some thank yous. So first of all, thank you, Peter and Michael and everyone at Atheist Ireland that made this interview possible. Thank you to Jeff Geddert and Mark Bell for the new theme music. It's Mark Bell's organ music, and then with some additional orchestration and instrumentation layered in, produced by Jeff Geddert. Jeff Geddert also provides production advice and additional written material for this podcast. I want to thank Sean and Ian, although we'll hear more from them in part 2. I do want to thank you for listening. Please share, like, forward, follow, and also please remember that we're going to try to follow a weekly production schedule for the next 10 weeks. We already have season 2, episode 2, queued up and ready to go 1 week from today, Sunday morning. It's my interview with Mike Kaplan and includes guest co-host Jesse Pimpinella. Also, April 11th, that's a Sunday, April 11th, we're going to do another live Q&A. Did a couple of those in season 1. It's also part of my live show. I do a Q&A with the audience. So some people seem to enjoy that. If you think of any questions or topics you'd like us to cover, please email me, comicalheathen@gmail.com, or contact us through Facebook or Twitter, or leave some comments down below. We really appreciate you. This is a self-produced, totally ad-free, independent podcast. And if you feel so inclined, we do have a donate button. There's a link down below that links with my other podcast, Gold Star Classroom, and then that has a donate button. So, of course, my friends make fun of me for making it unimaginably complicated to ask people to donate a few dollars. But there is a way to do it. I really appreciate you. Otherwise, thank you for listening. Look for part 2. Look for episode 2 next week. And I really appreciate you. Thank you very much. This is Dr. Jerry Jaffe. And remember, it may be your dogma, but it's my karma, and I'm all about spreading the love.